8, going to call the Policies and Priorities Committee meeting to order for Monday, February 10th. Take approval of the agenda, please. Councillor Noxana.
That all items in the February 10th, 2025 Policies and Priorities Committee meeting agenda be approved as presented.
Seconder, Councillor Norberry. All in favor? Carried. Adoption of minutes for January 13th, 2025. Policies and Priorities Committee meeting minutes. Recommendation, please. Councillor Dussault.
That the January 13th, 2025 Policies and Priorities Committee meeting minutes be approved as presented.
Seconder, Councillor Noxana. Any errors or omissions from council? Staff?
No.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Any business arising from the minutes, council? Staff?
No.
Thank you. Presentations from Urban Systems, Chad Carlstrom, Community Consultant, Principal at Urban Systems, in attendance to present to council the findings of the water treatment plant assessment. Welcome, Chad.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will be presenting two reports to you back to back. I will start with the water treatment plant assessment, followed by the water system assessment. So the water system assessment is basically all your water infrastructure except your water treatment plant. So your water treatment plant or water system as a whole was assessed, but just separated out into two different reports. So in the water treatment plant assessment, just going to give you an overview of your water treatment plant, talk about the main infrastructure components and our assessment of them. Then we'll get into some water data analysis, following by some water quality analysis, summarize the recommendations of the report, and then have an opportunity for any questions and answers. All right, so the water treatment plant, this facility was constructed originally in 1991. The structure itself was sized to accommodate 6 pressure filters inside of it. Only 4 were originally installed. So there was some foresight during the rapid growth of Tumbler Ridge to size the building a little bit larger to accommodate future expansion if or when needed. Significant upgrades then occurred in 2013 and 14, where a bunch of the internal piping and the valves and electronic components were replaced. The filter media inside your water treatment plant pressure vessels, that was also replaced at that time too. But I will note those upgrades did not increase the treatment capacity of your water treatment plant. It just kind of refreshed everything, brought it up into current standards. It's a well-maintained building, and a new backup generator was added for the facility in 2023, and coincidentally, while we were doing the assessment, there happened to be a power outage, and we got to see the generator kick on and your operations resume as they should. There is a detached structure on the site, which is currently used to store some excess materials, act as a little bit of a workshop, store some salt that's used in generating your chlorine. Inside the facility, you have your main filter room, and within the filter room, you have your raw water entering into it, which then splits out onto 2 headers, which then go into your 4 filtration tanks. Exiting of that is treated water during your backwash cycles. The backwash water is then rinsed out and gets discharged into your sanitary system. Chlorine is added into your treatment system, both as a disinfectant, and then also to help as a coagulant for your iron and manganese, which are the main metals that you're trying to remove out of your raw water source. The water treatment plant process, it is an automated process that staff can control through your SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition, and through an automated PLC, programmable logic controller. And that was updated in that 2013-2014 system. Backwash occurs generally once per day, and a backwash cycle takes about 1.5 hours to complete. The next major facility parameter is your chlorine room. And in Tumbler Ridge, chlorine is generated on site through the use of adding salt in the form of salt granules into a brine solution. Through the process of electrolysis, applying electricity to it, it can generate a lower concentration chlorine, and then that chlorine is used in the water treatment process. In other communities, chlorine can come in higher concentrations. It just affects on the dosing. And staff did note, though, that this chlorine production system, it does cause some maintenance issues throughout the years, and into the near future probably is in time for a replacement of that system. When we get into the design parameters of the water treatment plant, I know that there's some curiosity around like the historical design parameters on what the facility was designed around. And so we went back to the original design reports and shared this information in the report and then here during council for your curiosity. So when the water treatment plant was constructed, it was designed with a population of 4,500 people at the time, at the year 1991, and was designed to accommodate maximum day demand, water demand conditions. And so the design parameter was 50 liters a second of incoming water, which is also what well 7 and well 8 both can produce. So the wells were designed in conjunction with the water treatment plant. So you have 50 liters per second going in. Your 4 filters are designed to treat 12.5 liters per second. So thus you have 50 liters per second of treatment capacity. Now you will see, though, under that design population, under maximum day demand, 37.5 liters per second is what's recorded as the design. The design loading rate, and what that is acknowledging that a water treatment plant doesn't operate 24 hours out of a day. It was designed for 18 hours out of a 24-hour day. And I make special note of that, so averaged over the day, you're an average of 37.5 liters per second of water produced. The other thing that I will just point out about the historical design parameters is your per capita water use, which was assumed at the time. So water use was assumed at 365 liters per person per day. And that is simply by taking your total water demand divided by the population of people that live in Tumbler Ridge. Water consumption, if we look at this on a historical perspective, in the last 5 full years, 2019 to 2023, plus about the first 6 months of 2024, and then we pulled the population from BC Stats and do a little calculation, we can see that the per capita water usage in the last 5.5 years is in the high 900s up to 1,000 liters per person per day. Important context is back in 2016, there was a study that was done across participating local governments in BC, trying to find out what water consumption was like around the province. And at that point in time, the average responding municipalities was 494 liters per capita per day. So for Tumbler Ridge, the average water consumption is almost double. I will just point out a couple things on water consumption through conversations with district staff. High water use in Tumbler Ridge can be attributed to a few different things. There is no residential, industrial, commercial, or institutional water metering here, so water is billed on a flat rate. Treated water is used for golf course irrigation, which would have just a seasonal demand for that one. Water services, we have heard that there are some that have issues with freezing, and so some water users will keep the water running, preferably just during the winter time as needed to keep water circulating through to prevent it from freezing. But there may also be some instances where people don't know that they have a bleeder valve going on, and perhaps water is being sent to drain on a full annual basis. bulk water uses and industrial users of potable water. Yeah, those are other areas that could have significant impacts on your total water demand. As for the performance of your water treatment plant, when we look back on the data, we can use a ratio called recovery. So it's the ratio of your treated water to your backwash water. And what we see throughout the years is hasn't been any significant change that is any concern to us, so indicating that it's still performing well. We do note that there were some gaps in data recording throughout the years, which might have had an influence on the numbers, but we did our best with the data that we received in order to make corrections for that and to do our calculations. This graph here is taking your daily treated water production out of the water treatment plant over the last 5.5 years, starting in 2019 to about mid-2024. And if you kind of squint a little bit, you can see that there is a bit of a seasonal variation. You do have some uptick in water demand throughout the summer season. Some significant daily variations, which could be true, could be some data irregularities, but in general, what we can see here is the bold black line coming in at 3,240 cubic meters per day. That's the original water treatment plant design parameters. So that's your water treatment plant operating at 18 hours out of the 24-hour day. The above line that we plotted on the graph, that's what we're calling the theoretical maximum of what your water treatment plant can produce through operators' judgment, and that's operating at 22.5 hours out of a day, accounting for an 1.5 hour backwash cycle. So during periods of high water demand, operators say, yeah, we can push our water treatment plant to produce that amount of water. And so, on here, what you see on this table is counting the number of days per year that treated water exceeds either that original water treatment plant design parameter or that extended one operating at 22.5 hours per day. And so, yeah, the number of days that it exceeded the original design parameters, you see that increasing throughout recent years, as well with the 22.5 operating capacity, 22.5 hours operating capacity. But the number of days in which it does exceed is still fairly low compared to the operational capacity. And operators, your staff have indicated that on periods of high water demand, they can still meet the water demands. And they can do that through a number of ways by drawing down the reservoirs and also starting wells 1 and 3, which don't directly go into the water treatment plant, but are connected to your distribution system. So nothing too alarming. There's good operational methods in order to keep up with your water demands that you're seeing. In terms of water quality, there's 3 main parameters that I just want to comment on. The first is pH, and for all these water quality parameters, we reference the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guidelines as the benchmark. pH levels, you consistently adhere to meeting the required pH ranges. For manganese, there was an aesthetic objective to water quality that was updated in 2019, so made it more stringent. Recent data does indicate that aesthetic objective of having less than 0.02 milligrams per liter of manganese, that you have hit that throughout the years, and in some recent data that you have been meeting that. There has been exceedances of that within the last 5 years. Water quality for iron is the final water quality one, And in late 2024, so this was December 2024, there were updated guidelines, and this changed the aesthetic objective for the water quality for iron to set at less than 0.1 milligrams per liter. But based on your treatment, you are consistently meeting this updated guideline. When it comes to recommendations in the report, we classified them into a few different priorities: critical, urgent, high, medium, and low priority. Critical, just because of some of the concentration of sodium hypochlorite that's stored in the filter room in a drum. Just have some safety recommendations for an eye wash and shower station. Pretty straightforward for that to be added. But because it's a safety concern, just added that onto the critical. And that's just looking at current standard practices in the MSDS sheets for that chemical. Urgent, I would say that this costs you nothing, but can have a big impact, especially when we go back and look at data historically, just to ensure that the data parameters are collected and recorded on a daily basis. Some of the data is collected automatically through computerized SCADA systems. Some of it is collected and recorded manually. High priority, there are additional instrumentation that can be collected or can be added to your SCADA system so that it is collected on an automated way. There's an unobstructed access to the utility room, which could be resolved through storage and through conversations with staff that's quickly acted on and completed. Next, annually monitor water use trends and the ability of the water system to keep up. And so this is just keeping a close eye on it on an annual basis, making sure that the operators are still being able to keep up with water demands, especially if they're increasing, if there's population changes that you see into the future. The last high priority item that wanted to comment on during this presentation is just be aware of your aquifers, the sources of where your water is coming from, and I'll talk about it more in the water system assessment, but in how it relates to the water treatment plant. If groundwater is at risk of containing pathogens, or GARP as an abbreviation, it can affect what you're required to treat to. And so how you test for GARP is just on a continual basis. If there's any indication of pathogens, if groundwater is deemed to be GARP, then your water treatment plant does need to have 2 treatment barriers for viruses and bacteria. What that often means is just adding an additional treatment such as UV, ultraviolet light for filtration. And then medium and low priorities, I just refer to the report for that.
All right, questions? Thanks very much, Chad. Councilor Norbury and then Councilor Julik.
Thank you, Mr. Carlstrom, for coming in. I had a couple of questions. First, when it comes to the WTP performance, and that slide that you said that we are above, the usage 36 days a year, and 4 days a year we're above that, even that upper limit.
Yeah.
What impact can that have on our infrastructure there? Like, is that kind of like, my concern is it like redlining a car? Do we need to worry about that in the future?
Yeah, and that's where our recommendations are to monitor water use heading into the future and see if increasing water use continues. Hopefully through other measures such as water conservation, you can bring your total water use down. And through what staff reported is through operational methods such as drawing from the reservoirs or using water from wells 1 and 3, which don't flow through the water treatment plant, but are connected to your water distribution system, that more water supply can enter into the system to keep up with those periods of high demand.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mayor Kakalka. You led me into my next question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Carlstrom. And it's regards to this may not be a question for you, but what impact could that have to our fire attack readiness, fire emergency readiness? if we're draining a reservoir? That'd be a question that I have.
Yeah, so staff didn't provide any indication to me that the reservoir levels were drawn down to, I'd say, like critical levels, with the exception of, they did comment last year when they were doing repairs on your raw water line between well 7 and well 8 and the water treatment plant, which was an extended period without your main water source flowing through your water treatment plant. They said at that point, yeah, your reservoir levels were coming down with concern.
Thank you.
Councillor Julik.
Yeah, I was just looking at the charts. If you could go back to the manganese and the iron, the red title shows manganese, but then in the gray it says iron, and then vice versa for the red header. And the only reason I'm interested in that is because iron per day has been at 0.05 if I'm looking at the chart in the gray writing. You see what I'm,
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so it's 0.05, but the standard is 0.01, or is 0.1. Oh, okay, that's why, because I don't know how to do math. I saw 0.05 and thought 0.01, that's all. Okay, no, that's perfect then, because then I think we're probably good to go.
0.0.
Yeah, yeah, I was looking at the wrong number there. Thank you, that's, oh, and so, one more
go ahead.
question? Okay, thanks for that, and for everybody patient with me while I figured out how to read. The golf course water, do you think that would make a fairly big difference? Like, were you able to gauge what that might look like on that amount of water during a day? Like what that might look like if we could take that down considerably?
Yeah, within the scope of this, we didn't go that far, but I will say it was district staff that identified the golf course as a large water consumer.
Okay,
During those summer periods.
'Kay.
So it was them who brought that up as a recommendation.
so definitely someplace where we could look to lighten up the load on the treatment plant. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from council? I have a couple for you, Chad. So when we talk about the chart in regards to the water usage, we see a pretty high mark for 2023 when it was a heavy drought. So a fairly, hot summer, no snowpack, not that we feed off that, obviously we take it from aquifers, but we would be watering more. Whether that's the municipality watering the golf course or their own flowers and trees, but residents watering lawns. Do you maybe partake that to some of that?
Yeah, yep. Yeah.
Okay, and then my other question is under urgent recommendations, when you mentioned ensure the data perimeters are collected and recorded on a daily basis, are we missing some?
Yeah, historically, when we go back through the data, there are some days and some periods where data isn't recorded as consistently as it could be. And so when we do our analysis, we had to make some corrections for that.
Okay, and then just under your high priority, you mentioned about the SCADA system about automated. Is it a matter of flipping a switch or a matter of adding something to SCADA?
It would be adding,
Okay.
yeah, through instrumentation.
Anything else from council? All right, we're on to the water system assessment.
Great. So this water system assessment, it covers everything within the municipality pertaining to your water system, except for the water treatment plant. So I'll provide an overview of your water system, talk about select findings and recommendations, and then similar to the last report, provide an opportunity for questions and answers. So the major components within your water system, you have your water treatment plant, of course, 4 raw water wells, 2 aquifers, 2 reservoirs, 1 booster station, 5 PRV stations, PRV standing for pressure reducing valve stations, 1 bulk water fill station, and 2 storage facilities. I will note you don't own the aquifers, but they are important to your source water. Yeah. Other components, and these aren't linked with the figure next to them, but you have your distribution network, hydrants, valves, air release valves, blow-offs, and water services up to property line or the curb stop. Anything past the property line is the responsibility of that property owner. Within your water distribution system, this figure is a little bit interesting. I want to pause here and talk about it for a little bit. How we graph this is, we graph this with the line weights representing the pipe diameter. So the heavier the line weight, the larger your pipes. And we also graphed it in a way such that the pink lines or red lines correspond to ductile iron pipe, and your yellow lines correspond to PVC water main. And what we can take from this figure when we study it is that your larger, more trunks in your distribution system, the backbone of your water system, your larger diameter water mains, they were constructed and installed with ductile iron pipe, whereas the majority of the rest of your system is constructed with PVC. And then if we go on to the next slide, I just want to make that distinction because throughout the years of known water leaks that have occurred in your system. So in 2016 and again in 2024, a company called Watermark Solutions conducted water leak detection surveys in Tumbler Ridge. And in both instances, 2016 and 2024, water leaks were discovered. In 2024, they were engaged because of a suspected leak along your raw water main connecting well 7 and well 8 to your water treatment plant. And indeed, Watermark was able to locate this leak of approximately 10 liters per second, which district staff were successfully able to repair last year. But unlike other communities, the ground of Tumbler Ridge is quite porous and free draining. And so where water leaks in other communities might come to the surface, in Tumbler Ridge, oftentimes that water just escapes underground. So without the use of undertaking like acoustical leak detection through specialized services such as Watermark, you may not know that you have water leaks in your system, which leads to one of the recommendations of the report is about once every 5 years, you should have acoustical leak detection done on your water system. With regards to ductile iron and the PVC, so in 2024, there were 2 leaks that Watermark detected. Both were on ductile iron segments, both which the district successfully repaired. And back in November 2022 there was another leak on your raw water line. And whether or not it's a trend on leaks within your ductile iron pipe, time might be able to tell. But that is a recommendation in this report too, is to investigate. And you can do that through non-destructive testing. There's some pretty good technology out there, but to monitor your ductile iron pipes just to see if it's a trend or not for these water leaks. Yeah, here are just some photos from 2024 of that water leak along your raw water line. And as I mentioned in the previous water treatment plant assessment, it caused the water reservoirs to be drawn down as staff worked on that repair. For your wells and aquifers, well 7 and well 8, they're connected to the flatbed aquifer, whereas wells 1 and 3 are connected to the terrace aquifer. Both are separate from each other, they're not connected. You do have well 4, which should be formally decommissioned. It's currently not in use. Staff didn't even have keys to get into the building anymore. But there is a process to formally decommission a well in accordance with the appropriate regulations. Aquifers in general, do you want to comment on these? You know, knowing your source water and protecting your source water is important. And back in 2011 and 2012, there were some historical reports that were done by some other firms. And there were recommendations in those reports that I think are still valid today, mainly understanding the extents of your aquifers and the roles that the district can play in protecting them. So even when you consider things such as land use and zoning and development approvals, those can all be good things to be aware of. And so revisiting those recommendations from those 3 listed reports would be a good thing to do. Also pertaining to the wells and aquifers, so in 2016, the province of BC enacted new legislation, which is the Water Sustainability Act. And for all existing users that were drawing groundwater from a well, except for individual household purposes, needed to register their wells under this new Water Sustainability Act. And back in 2016, we began the process with the District of Tumbler Ridge, helping you support this application. And coincidentally, as we were preparing this report, we heard back in January 2025 from the government agency overseeing that, as your application is still open. You could imagine the province of BC received thousands of applications all around a similar time as soon as they enacted the legislation. So they're still working their way through their applications. But I will say that the government staff did identify with the amount of water that's being requested under this new license. They do have an awareness of the amount of water use compared to the population, and so they brought that up in recent communications. So when you're considering water use into the future, I think you should know that other people are also and then just want to comment on Simon Fraser University. So some correspondence was shared with us from last year where there are some researchers with Simon Fraser University that are looking at groundwater wells throughout the whole province of BC with declining water levels. And they were inquiring with district staff, hey, have you noticed an impact on any of the water that you're able to withdraw from well 7 or well 8? District staff haven't noticed any impacts, but what these researchers have seen with the flatbed aquifer, because there is a provincial monitoring well in this aquifer, so yeah, they are able to pull that data, but a declining trend of 0.14 meters per year. So pretty consistent trend. And we'll leave it up to their research as to reasons as to why there might be this declining trend. So I would recommend that you remain in contact with them, as this is your main source water for well 7 and 8, your primary wells. As for your reservoirs, you have 2 reservoirs in your system, main reservoir and the Tumbler Ridge Industrial Park Reservoir, one at 7 million liters, the other at 3 million liters. Our main recommendation for both of these reservoirs that they are inspected and cleaned. They haven't been cleaned yet since their original construction, so it's due for an inspection and cleaning. For your pressure reducing valves, they are important in keeping constant water pressures throughout the different elevations of your water distribution system. You have 3 PRVs along Mackenzie Way, 1 PRV at the Saddle Club, and 1 PRV at the golf course before the irrigation system. The main recommendation for this one is PRV 3. It is a small chamber, difficult for staff to access for maintenance, and it is leaky, so water is getting into the chamber. So a couple options. You could replace it with an underground chamber, or you could bring it up to above ground, an above ground small little kiosk that's heated, easier for staff to access. Nothing immediate urgent on that, but something to keep in your capital planning. Sometimes overlooked but very important is storage, especially being more remote municipality, it's important that you have excess materials in order for you to maintain your systems. And so water system maintenance materials are either stored at Public Works or within the Quonset near the ball diamonds. The ball diamonds does offer nice dry storage, often used for smaller materials, maybe metallic fittings, things like that. You know, at Public Works, it would be good to protect some of your water system maintenance quantities just in a more accessible all-weather storage compartment, which could come in many forms. Helps prevent UV degradation of any of your PVC pipes, and then you know, if you need to try and find any maintenance materials, say you have a water main break in the winter or springtime, yeah, it avoids digging through feet of snow just to try and find what you're looking for. So it enables staff to respond faster. You know, in general, if I talk about the water system, I'd say, yeah, minor repairs, paint, facade upgrades to some of your facilities that house your water system components. So it's pretty simple things that can have a big impact on extending the service life. Also recommend that operations and maintenance checks of the facilities are done just in accordance with the district's established daily, monthly, and annual expectations, which are set up for each facility. And just make sure that when those operations do happen, that they're logged accordingly. Keep good track of data over time. There also is opportunities to increase SCADA integration such that staff are more connected with some of your facilities at a centralized way. They can supervise it from the water treatment plant, and then that data is collected just automatically through the computers. There are also a couple SCADA communication issues where due to interference or perhaps long distances that there's sometimes data connection issues between the facility and the main SCADA point at the water treatment plant. So those can get resolved. And then finally, just going back to the water consumption, I know I brought it up a couple times, but recommend to explore ways to reduce community water consumption and explore using non-potable water for golf course irrigation, something that did happen in the past, but perhaps could be revisited. And, you know, just for your consideration, you know, a public awareness campaign around water usage, let's use $10,000 as an example, you know, that could go a long way and could be quite effective compared to a couple orders of magnitude of saying $1 million in upgrading your infrastructure in order to accommodate high water usage. So I think that there's opportunities for some quick and easy wins on water consumption, and even just small little upgrades that you can do within your control to address some minor issues with your water system. But overall, staff are doing a good job at maintaining your water system and operating it.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Chad. Council Norbury.
Thank you, Mayor Kalka. Thank you again, Mr. Carlstrom, for your explanation of our water system. I just had a quick question in regards to leak detection. I did see that you found 3 leaks off those 400 millimeter pipes. Was there any tests into our residential area on those smaller pipes? Yeah, because if you did, then we know there's no leaks. Just kind of curious if it made it that far.
Yes, in both 2016 and 2024, Watermark did acoustical leak detection of your entire water system, including all the residential areas. In 2016, they did discover a couple leaks on services that were investigated further and fixed if they needed.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Julik.
I never knew I didn't know so much about water. So when we talk about the ductile iron pipes, is it something that other communities maybe have changed? Like, is it something that you would look at or consider changing out completely? Or is it just something that you continually fix? Like, what's kind of the standard for that?
Yeah, so the reason why your ductile iron pipe is leaking, that's inconclusive. Perhaps it was during installation. Maybe there's something about the pipe material itself. Tough to say as to why, as to what to do about it. There are opportunities for trenchless technologies where you could line the inside of your ductile iron pipe with a non-metallic material, and basically expands inside that existing pipe. That can be very cost effective for communities. Alternatives, pipe materials since the early 1980s, and the technology has come a long way. You can replace it with materials such as PVC or HDPE. So you don't feel like you need to stick with ductile iron just because that was used at that time. You do have high pressures in your water main, particularly down near well 7 and well 8. It has a long way to go for those pumps to push that water up to the reservoir. So that's likely why ductile iron was chosen back in the day, was due to those high pressures and larger sizes.
Follow-up?
And so PVC is a stronger material?
It has different material properties, but tough to say on strength, but they do make PVC pipes that could replace the ductile iron.
I had a question from the previous report that I forgot to ask.
Go ahead.
So you had talked about changing the chlorine system, or that it needed to be upgraded or something needed to be changed. Is there a different system that we would be further ahead to change to, or is that cost prohibitive?
Yeah, one of the recommendations is for us, or for the district to complete just a little study on your options, whether it's more economical to continue with bringing in salt, which costs about $600 a month in just salt granules, and then producing your own chlorine on site through electrolysis, or some other alternatives is bringing in higher concentration chlorine, say in drums or totes, and then using that as your dosing. And so, figuring out how much would be needed under the different systems, weighing out the pros and cons. We would recommend undertaking that before you make another investment.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of questions. My easiest one is with the PVC as the continuation of the main line, is there a known life expectancy, or is that not sort of the standard until more recently?
Yeah. So PVC pipe became quite popular in the 1980s and is very common today. What they're projecting is, well, no PVC pipe has remained underground for more than 100 years, but they are projecting that it will last over 100 years.
Okay, that's great.
And they've done that through digging up existing segments of PVC pipe, testing it in laboratories.
That's good to hear. What I'm more concerned about with that ductile iron, every few years having somebody manually scan seems you're just waiting for something to happen and essentially reacting every time. I don't know if the technology works this way, but it would be possible to have water metering, say, near the wells and see what the flow through is there and have it on various checkpoints. We have a few PV pressure reducing valve points. We have the treatment center. We have obviously the pumps. Is that a viable way of perhaps monitoring that doesn't require waiting and hoping that our leaks aren't taking 20% of our flow, or?
Yes, and that in fact happened. In 2023, there was a flow meter that was added to the wells. And that's where staff picked up that, hey, there's a discrepancy in the flow meter at the well and the flow meter at the water treatment plant of approximately 10 liters per second. And then sure enough, upon further investigation, yeah, they found the leak, and it was estimated at that 10 liters per second, so.
Okay, I didn't.
Yeah, good example of using data from two different points to monitor.
And that's
your
just
system.
it. I mean, waiting, especially with your example of it draining into the ground, like, I don't like waiting, especially for capacity starting to get near the, near max to lose that much flow. And you already answered my other question I had about replacement for ductile and other options, so I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? So I got one for you. Is there a reason why we're decommissioning well 4, or a concept why we would? We would never need that extra water if population growth?
Yeah,
Or it's not good enough water?
Staff indicated that it hasn't been used in years, and well 1 and 3 are connected to that terrace aquifer, as it's called, and they're able to produce about 15 liters per second each from that well.
Okay, perfect. That's all I got. Anything else from council? You have to wait till the end of the agenda. Sorry, sir. Sorry. I apologize. And if it's something for this, you might want to maybe hit chat up outside, but as I won't be able to be as in depth, but we don't normally order open questions to the delegations from residents. All right, well, thank you very much for the update. Thanks for the thoroughness and the pictures. I think the pictures help out, especially with the leaks, and I know staff had already supplied them and stuff, but it's good to see them again. Thanks very much. Okay, moving on to reports, water system assessment and water treatment plant systems. Report dated February 10th, 2025 from the Director of Operations and Infrastructure regarding water system assessment and water treatment plant systems. Recommendation, Councillor Norbury.
That council receives this report for information.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Noxana. I'm going to make comment, I can't support it as I had a couple questions. You just beat me. I seen your button on it, but that's, I have a couple questions just for staff. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, call the question on the motion. All in favor? Everybody's opposed. Motion is defeated. I'm going to put a motion for discussion. Seconder, Councillor Noxana, sorry. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Ms. Scott, my only question would be when it comes to listening to the delegation, but on the water treatment assessment, my question is more on the water system assessment. When we hear that after the curb, we don't own any infrastructure after that. So I've been in some conversation with a few residents in town, how we have fire hydrants off and in there, like their middle of their driveways. So I know for a few residents, they've been hit and removed. Because we own that, and if we're looking at doing some assessment, is there any way of doing a study on how many we have that are in the middle of people's driveways that we can find out if we can move them?
I will ask the Director of Operations to provide that information for you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mayor and Council, yes, we can do a study throughout the community and see how many we have. I believe at this point, there's 3 that are problems.
Okay, thank you for that. So my question would be then is because those are ours, even though they're past the end of the property line. I know of one that a resident has brought me to their residence, and it's quite a distance in. And I understand the 3 feet, and it's actually, we don't talk about 3 feet anymore. It's meters or something. I apologize. Staff will correct it, but what complications would we have there? That's like when I seen it and heard it from the delegation when he talked about hydrants and stuff, and that's what brought that question forward.
Again, I'll ask the Director of Operations to provide that information.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mayor and Council, that would definitely need further investigation as to what implications come from that.
Yeah. And Ms. Scott, would you need a notice of motion for staff to look into that? When I'm not looking for a report, it's just not in here on how many fire hydrants are actually within, I would think, residential property line, past the property line.
Yes, that should come as a notice of motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Julik?
So I'm looking at pages 97, 98, 99. So this $1.8 million, like, is that a shot in the dark? Like, so there's recommendations here, and I'm wondering, like, what is that looking like for the future? Like, is this something that we need to start putting money aside for, or is that kind of thing?
I think, maybe just before we go to Ms. Scott, but that's why we've raised taxes on water, but Ms. Scott is to get that money up.
Yeah, and when you read through the recommendations and everything that's included on page 97, 98, and 99, it's not all stuff that needs to be done immediately, and it's things that we are already currently doing. For instance, it talks about $30,000 every 5 years for the leak detection. So, I mean, we're already budgeting for some of those things. And now that we have this report, I would imagine that would be part of operating and capital budgets that we will see in subsequent years coming from that department.
Yeah, like, I think for me, when I look at some of the actual mechanic stuff, the air release valves, like reading the report and some of those things being on the high priority, so I'm assuming if there was something that staff felt needed to be done, we would see in this budget cycle.
I will defer that question to the Director of Operations if he feels if any of these recommendations are urgent enough that they need to be considered in this budget.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. What I've presented to you this so far for 2025, that meets all of our urgencies at this point in time.
Thank you. Anything else?
The golf course water option. So I see that there's a $50,000 price tag to explore options. Is there some clarity on what that would look like?
Ms. Scott?
Again, I'll ask the Director of Operations to provide additional information, but I believe that that would include hiring somebody to consider all options, whether it was using an existing well, drilling a well, pulling out of the river, I mean, all. But again, I will ask the Director of Operations if he can provide additional information.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yes, Mayor, what Ms. Scott was saying is correct. The $50,000 would be to explore all of our options as far as providing raw water to the golf course instead of treated water.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, I have a couple more, I apologize, but when we talk about the golf course, I'm going to use that one as a for example. The delegation actually mentioned that we used to do it with raw water. We used to not use treated water. So there must have been something that used to be down at the golf course. Unless he misspoke, but he mentioned in his delegation.
I understood that he meant that we had investigated it previously and hadn't done anything about it.
Okay, good enough, thank you. And the other question I would comment, and Councillor Judd kind of brought it up, but I see consider extending the water main network to the Saddle Club as it's only serviced by a single 50-millimeter line from the main reservoir for $800,000. I think we've had a lot of discussion. To me, it just seems like, are we trying to pre-establish that we want water going to a rural area that we've maybe listed as one of the rural areas for properties past the Saddle Club?
Again, I'll pass that to Director of Operations, but I believe that is a recommendation that the report has brought to council as something to consider, and then obviously all of the things that are listed in here as recommendations can be, debated over the importance of, but again, I'll ask the Director of Operations if he has any additional information to add.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yes, currently there is a 50-millimeter line that runs along the back highway from the reservoir underneath the highway to the Saddle Club. We also have a deadheaded pipe that goes out just by the ball diamonds. That could be a connection there as well. At no point was this to just try to get water to the Saddle Club. It was to upgrade what we currently have there as a system.
Thank you very much for that. Ms. Scott, one other question. I know I was in and talked to you, and it's within the report, and that's about it. I mean, I'm going to use the wrong term because I was trying to find it when I was flipping through because I didn't mark the page, but about working or exercising the valves. I know previously we had an assessment done within the municipality, and it was noted that we were not doing that. It was when we had some concerns, and I believe it was at the end of Front Street and Southgate. And we realized we weren't moving the valves, and I think then it was something put into play to make sure we were going around and doing that on an annual basis. Are we doing that?
Yeah, so again, just for clarification, that it would be on page 90 of the
Thank you.
agenda for anybody who's looking for it. And again, I will defer that question to the Director of Operations, who can provide information about what we're doing operationally there.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yes, we do valve exercising annually as well as hydrant flushing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the reply. I know Ms. Scott, when I met with Ms. Scott, she said the same thing, but it was because I had a question directed to the CEO. I, again, wanted to ask it in the open meeting. Okay, anything else from council? Any questions? All right. Thank you very much for staff to answer all that. Okay, moving on to the proposed 2025 District of Tumbler Ridge and BC Wildfire Services prescribed burning report dated February 10th, 2025 from the FireSmart coordinator regarding the proposed 2025 District of Tumbler Ridge and BC Wildfire Services prescribed burning. Recommendation, please. Councillor Noxana.
Council receives this report for discussion.
Seconder. Councillor Julik. All in favor? Carried. Ms. Scott, is staff prepared just to do an overview for us? I mean, don't take me wrong, I've read the report, went through this, and to me, it seems like we are set up to have a presentation by staff.
I believe that presentation was intended to be what is
Oh, hang on, sorry, I had you on, it must come off.
Sure. I believe the presentation that's attached is what is intended to be presented to the public when it goes to public consultation. But I can ask the Director of Protective Services if they would like to give an overview of what's before you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Ms. Scott. Tonight with me, I do have Brian Robinson, our FireSmart coordinator, and I'm sure it would be his pleasure to walk you through. Unfortunately, we wouldn't have it up on the screens for everybody else. There will be, exactly Ms. Scott said, this is meant to be for the public, and likely Mr. Robinson is going to talk about the public's engagement side of things. So with that, I will pass it off to Brian.
Thank you, Chief Curry, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yeah, we'll just start off at the front of the PowerPoint here. Flipping into page 1. It's just a brief description about why prescribed fire is kind of the talk of the last few seasons. You know, a few of the perks include public safety and wildfire risk reduction, preserving indigenous cultural values, improved wildlife habitat, revitalized vegetation, and protecting local economies. To the right of that on the slide, you'll see the 7 FireSmart disciplines and how prescribed burning supports those disciplines, which will tie into our CWRP, which is being developed now, which is the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. Slide 2, you'll see just a breakdown of kind of the progression of the planning. Last summer, Chief Curry and members of BC Wildfire visited multiple sites around Tumbler Ridge and identified a few that were viable for prescribed burns. Over the winter, we've identified values such as species at risk, migratory bird, anything else that applies to that area, and gone through kind of the planning parameters and the planning windows as far as nesting and those types of things. We've also identified the trails as well as any other infrastructure in that area that may be affected. Following that, we moved on to consulting with West Moberly and Soto First Nations. We've extended invitations for both of them to participate either operationally or just to be there to bring it in, as well as an assessment of the planned area for migratory birds. Planned ignition, I've left that blank. That'll be filled in with the BC Wildfire Burn Plan, which has been submitted for approval. And then following that, the last box will be a post-burn monitoring plan, which will be implemented. And it'll include things such as erosion and sediment control, impacts to migratory birds, impacts to species at risk, etc. Moving on to prescribed fire objectives. The primary goal of this prescribed fire is to reduce the fire hazard and risk to the community of Tumbler Ridge by introducing a low-intensity fire to the proposed burn area / prescribed fire unit, as it'll be referenced later on, which is located southwest of the town site. The primary objectives of introducing this fire are to consume 80% or more of the Rocky Mountain juniper shrub located within the PFU, to consume 80% or more of the accumulated matted grass, leaf litter, fine surface fuels within the units. Mortality of aspen regen and immature spruce is acceptable, at a certain percentage, which is 75, while mature aspen and spruce will not be targeted to be removed. The target will be to burn 80% of the unit's area and an overall enhancement to the biodiversity of the area. The target is a fire with an intensity class 3, which is a low-intensity ground fire. You know, nothing into the canopy, nothing into the taller trees. This should result in a vigorous surface fire with sufficient intensity and residence time, which is the fire staying in one spot long enough to sufficiently burn all the material there as opposed to just running along the top. Sorry for my blabbering there. A secondary objective of the burn is to enhance first responder relationships and increase experience between the District of Tumbler Ridge's Fire Department and the BC Wildfire Service. This shared collaboration would also promote and create awareness of the FireSmart disciplines within the community, two of these being cross-training and interagency cooperation. Community members involved with the TRFD will be working in partnership with members of the Dawson Creek Fire Zone, which is BC Wildfire, as well as the Prince George Fire Center, to complete this burn as part of a joint training exercise. Additionally, community members that are involved with West Moberly First Nation as well as Soto First Nations emergency response entities have been invited to participate with the execution of this proposed burn. Please feel free to scoot me through any of these sections that you guys don't want any.
You can just do a broad overview.
Yeah, it is.
That's all I'm looking for.
Yeah, okay.
You spent a lot of time here, I gotta talk to Miss Scott, sorry. But staff has spent a lot of time here, and I get it, that it's not up on the screen for people that are on Zoom. But I think it's very important when you guys spend a lot of time on this, and I understand this is to go back out when you guys engage public, but I think it's something worth talking about as we get up to that step, so just a broad overview.
I tend to ramble, so please just flag me if I am rambling. So a couple of specifics about the introduction to the Southern Burn Unit. This site was selected based on several factors, including the fuel load, slope position, the amount of recreational motor vehicle traffic, proximity to local campgrounds, and numerous ignition sources by the way of fire pits. Exposures include the Tumbler Ridge Trail Network, private residences along Bergeron Drive, Soto First Nations TLE parcel, which is below the burn location, Flatbed Creek and the Lions Campground, as well as Highway 29. The environmental considerations we touched on already: migratory bird, archaeological, terrain stability, and species at risk, and those will all be monitored throughout the operation and post-burn. I've lost count of my slides, but we're moving on to the introduction to the Southern Burn Unit number 2. The total the total area will be the red line that you see there, and that'll be a total of 4.3 hectares. To the left, there's a smaller segment outlined in white. That is a total of 2.13 hectares, and that'll be the initial test fire, followed by the larger yellow section, which is 2.63 hectares, which will be ignited following the extinguishment of the first burn. Okay, good. Yeah, so just following this map here, BC Wildfire, this is part of the approved burn, not approved, draft burn plan, and BC Wildfire has identified the purple line as the primary hose lay that will be charged from a municipal water source, i.e. a hydrant along Bergeron Drive. It'll be laid and pre-charged prior to any ignitions. There will also be a preliminary briefing between all groups to include parking areas, ignition points, control lines, patrol areas for other crews to drive around Bergeron Drive and the highway to ensure no spot fires escaping, and other control measures such as that. The fire itself will be managed by one burn boss from BC Wildfire, a deputy burn boss, which is likely to be Chief Curry, or a designate from TRFD. The ignition crew will include 6 igniters managed by a BC Wildfire burning boss. There will be a holding crew that is identified with a BC Wildfire holding supervisor and includes pump operators and patrolling resources, as well as managing equipment, which will be just completed by hand crews with hand tools, as well as 2 Mark III wildfire pumps and 5,000 feet of 1.5 inch hose. In preparation for the burn, Flagging gates will be constructed and all the trails will be reviewed to make sure that there's nobody in the trails or in the area. Fuel-free hand line will be constructed at the base of the slope. Any identified danger trees will be dealt with prior to ignition, and all crews on site will be briefed prior to the operations. Focused areas of fuel mitigation work may be undertaken to remove some of the more concentrated areas of juniper shrub along the slope, just to reduce the fire behavior in those areas. That'll be completed pre-ignition. Weather condition and venting indices will be confirmed on site the day of ignition. And all crews will be fully briefed a final time prior to ignitions. In the slides, you'll see just a couple of pictures that I unfortunately took in the snow, but you will see that there are some pretty heavy accumulations of juniper along the slope, which is one of the most flammable vegetation we have in our region for sure. Yeah, so we have a few contingency plans as far as monitoring for escapes as well as inspection frequency post-extinguishment, just to ensure that everything's been cold trailed, everything's been mopped up. Smoke management, if the first fire is lit and we are not liking how smoke is being distributed, operations would be paused and there would be no further continuing of the plan. Any constructed fire guard will be documented and assessed for potential development into a trail expansion if that's an interest. And if not, it will be rehabbed to go back to a natural state, plantable, and likely grass seeded with some kind of native seed, just to make sure that everything stays post-burn, just because it is quite sloped. Following the completion of the prescribed burn, efforts will be made to have all the fires extinguished within 48 hours. If more time is required for mop-up or patrol, the burn boss, which is BC Wildfire, will determine the needs with Deputy Burn Boss, Chief Curry, or designate, and notify the Prince George Fire Center and partners, just to ensure that there's support throughout the region. Mop-up and patrol activities will start following the commencement of the ignition. The suppression lines will be utilized to wet all fire flanks to ensure there is no spread beyond identified unit boundaries. Once the perimeter of the unit is deemed secure, it will be determined as and when fire suppression within the interior of the burn unit is needed. The perimeter and immediate 50 feet buffer surrounding the recent burn unit will be monitored for the remaining day and throughout the next operational day. Yeah, that's the that's the guts and feathers of it anyways. We have reached out to West Moberly and Soto First Nations, and we have been consulting with them. Soto First Nations has returned with a couple of, not necessarily concerns, but just points, and we've addressed those and we'll work those into our monitoring plan. We've received nothing from West Moberly at this point, and we will begin our recreational and public consultation following this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate the overview. Like I said, I see staff put together, and I mean, I read through it all slide to slide. But I think it's important to have that conversation. But Councillor Noxena.
Thank you. You'd mentioned that consultations already happened with local First Nations, which is amazing. However, WNMS, Grizzly Valley ATV both have trails in the area, and they would be under the umbrella of Trora. Will consultation happen with these groups before this plan goes into action? And would they be able to possibly help with public engagement or even notification on their social media outlets?
Yeah, so I think this presentation eventually is going to go to the public for public consultation. But Mrs. Scott?
I think I heard in Mr. Robinson's summary that engagement with the recreational users would happen next, but in case I heard that wrong, I will direct that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. I'm just going to pass this off to Mr. Robinson. He's the subject matter expert on this plan.
Thank you, Chief Curry. Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yes, we will begin consultation with Trora, the Wolverine Nordic Mountain Society, and the Lions, and all the recreational groups and other entities within Tumbler Ridge following this meeting.
Follow-up, Councillor Roxana?
Just wondering if the mop-up of trails or mop-up of this area would include the trails being put back to the, not the state they're in now, but a usable state for ATV users, hikers, things like that, and what the timeline would be.
Ms. Scott?
So again, I'll ask the Director of Protective Services to provide that information.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, all of the trails that are existing will not be altered to be an unusable state. And if any damage is incurred upon the trails, that will be corrected immediately post-operations prior to anybody leaving the site.
Thank you. Good. Councillor Juick and then Councillor Norbury.
So as we talk about the communication plan, and to Councillor Noxana's question, are we doing separate consultation with the user groups versus the public, or is it gonna be kind of like an open house town hall type of deal for everybody to come in and
I'm not sure. I'm
throw
not
around
doing it.
opinions?
Ms. Scott?
It's my understanding that they would be simultaneous, but again, I will direct that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mayor and Council. It will be multifaceted. There's going to be considerable amount of public engagement for, or opportunities for public engagement. So looking at where facility-wise to host this and then having it over a multiple amount of dates in order to try and encapsulate or capture, I should say, as many people as we can, understanding that this has a significant potential to be very received, whether it be well received or negatively received by the public. We really want to have lots of opportunities for the public to engage. I'll let Mr. Robinson chime in on a few other activities that he's got in mind for public engagement, because I know he's been working on that.
Thank you, Chief Curry. Yes, I would like to host at least 2 public sessions, as well as get in contact with the main entities of each of those groups and have direct consultation with those groups, just especially Trora, just because there's so many groups within that umbrella. That's the plan. And to follow up, sorry, Councillor Noxana, about the previous, Ms. Scott, the previous question, yes, groups will have the opportunity to put things out on their social media to get their members included as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I would just like to acknowledge what Chief Curry said, because of course, when I opened this, I was like, that's where we're going? So I absolutely agree. I think that there's going to be some concerns with it being close to residential areas and down into the flatbed campground, because, you know, those are all near and dear, right? So instead of asking a bunch of questions here specifically about that, I'll just go to the public consultations as well. And thanks for the information around juniper being very flammable, because totally didn't know that till this report. And so I appreciate the report. I think it's really well put together. And instead of asking a bunch of questions here, I'll make sure I get to the public consultations.
Thank you. Councillor Norbury?
Thank you, Mayor Kaka. I did have some questions regarding the safety of proposed burns. Most notably, I go back to 2023 when the Northern Shuswap had a failure of a backburn. Is backburning a common practice that is accepted in BC as a way of fire prevention?
Ms. Scott?
I will direct that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Chief Curry, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. I would say governmentally, BC Wildfire itself is a big proponent of backfires, especially in large industrial settings in the backcountry. More so in the last 5 years, I would say there's been a resurgence of cultural burning, also known as prescribed burning. And that's been the focal point of a lot of community protection across the province. And I think it's going to be the way things begin to shift away from, or not necessarily away from large mechanical treatments, but more of a way of maintaining areas that have been previously treated, such as along the golf course road. That could be a good way to maintain that area that's been previously harvested, as opposed to going back and revisiting the original treatment.
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kakaka. Thank you for that explanation. As you know, one of the things we do talk about is the maintenance of those areas that have been treated. And I do know that the best way to limit wildfire exposure is to remove that that low flammable material. My other question is regarding like the safeguards. Like I saw that we're going to have a pipeline, hose line, excuse me, all the way around the prescribed area. Now, how would that be used in case there is a emergency? To me, it looks like there's one line in and then it kind of circles around. Would there, if we had to tie into one, does that mean we can't go in another section of line? I also saw that we're going to have apparatus available. So my concern is like, how resilient are we to an emergency in that regard? Would it make sense to have a secondary line for, redundancy?
Ms. Scott?
I'll refer that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Safeguard is paramount to any plan that we're making for a prescribed burn. In addition to the wet line that you see on the map and where we're going to draw that, we also are investigating the opportunity to put our sprinkler protection equipment into practice as part of this. So the series of homes that you see on the bottom of Bergeron, we'll be reaching out to those homes and to look and see if we can actually establish a sprinkler line at the property edge of that. If not, we may just do it on the inside of our the district's property that's there if they're not comfortable with us putting them on their own property. But I'll let Mr. Robinson talk a little bit more about the safeguards that he's got already in place as part of the plan.
Thank you, Chief Curry, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yeah, there will be a series of structural protection units, including Tumbler Ridge Fire Departments, as well as a Type 2 trailer from BC WILDFIRE, which is a separate entity that they'll send to support. We'll stage these units as we deem applicable and where we can gain permission, similar to Chief Curry stated. Additionally, off of that main wet line, which will be 1.5 inches, we will have additional Ys with a 5/8-inch garden hose for multiple points of line off of the main line, as well as a stockpile of supplies and roving crews along Highway 29 and Bergeron, just to be able to action with an apparatus anything that is spotted.
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Calkin. Thank you for that explanation. I don't mean to second guess or suggest that our protective services doesn't have this well under hand. It's good to hear that out loud. What's out there? What's going to be protecting us? Because there's that age-old piece of advice: you don't fight fire with fire, and we're fighting fire with fire. Which we're not fighting fire with fire, but we're using fire to prevent fire. And there's danger there. So thank you very much for going through that and walking us through the protections in place. I know that I can go to the residents and say, hey, they got it lined up. Don't worry about it. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Julick and then Councillor Noxana.
Yeah, I noticed I had one more question written down. So I recognize that this is what we're planning for 2025. I know that there were some concerns. I'm thinking specifically about a neighbor of mine on the, further east. So are we looking at more prescribed burns for another year, specifically around that tall grass area and stuff that I know we've talked about before?
Yeah, I can't answer for staff, but I know they're looking at all of it, and not just staff, but even BC Wildfires. Because it's probably Ministry of Forest that started the RFP process to look outside of what the FireSmart coordinator is doing, that the district applied for a grant. But Ms. Scott?
Yeah, and again, I'll pass this to the Director of Protective Services, but I believe future prescribed burning or future plans for fire mitigation will be part of that community wildfire prevention plan that we're currently working on. But again, I will pass that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mayor and Council, so I'll let Mr. Robinson talk more about, because we are absolutely looking at other prescription areas. We do have to be careful, though. In some cases, it's actually private property where we have to do this, or they're woodlots. So there's a mandate for individuals and lot owners to maintain treatments that have done in the past. So we have to kind of walk that, what we can do and what we can't do. And then on the Crown land, as the mayor alluded, there is the overarching wildfire mitigation strategy that the province is undertaking in the area as well. But I'll let Mr. Robinson clarify anything I got wrong.
Yeah, that's correct. There was another area previously identified by Chief Curry and the BC Wildfire staff in summer of 2024, which is just to the north of the saddle grounds at the previously harvested area. It basically encompasses the full the full scope of that block that was there. That was tied up at the time between a transfer between Crown land and municipality land, and that's kind of where we lost getting that involved in this plan. I have that on my short list for either spring 2026, if we have a slow fire year this year, maybe fall 2025, if there's resources. And if not, we would wrap that into next spring and try to encompass another area as well. Going forward, if we can continue to do this, it just increases the capabilities of the Tumbler Ridge Fire Department. And the more capable they become, the more often these can be completed kind of on our own basis.
Thank you.
Yeah, the quick question I would have is when Director Curry discussed about owners having some responsibility, have we reached out to those owners? Are we talking industrial owners? Are we talking private homeowners, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I don't think Chief Curry's talking about that specific area. He's just talking in general when they went around the community that there could be some private land there or private cut blocks. So that's how they work into the realm of their plan. So it wasn't that they're reaching out to individuals. They have to make sure that that's not a private cut block, a privately owned piece of property. Okay, Councillor Noxena.
Thank you. It sounds like there would be a significant amount of Tumbler Ridge personnel working on this project on this day, which is great. It's a great amount of learning for our local fire department. However, will there be a contingency plan for town? Because we know emergencies don't wait for people to be free to happen. So would another fire department be able to come in or be on call? How would that work for the community?
Yeah, I'll go to staff, but I would think as they plan this, and I'm just going to speak and then go to staff. I'll go to Ms. Scott, but to me, when I read through the report, I'm going to be honest, when I read through it, we're not going to put any jeopardizing the community at all. If we're not fully staffed to have enough people, and I believe that's when I heard from the delegate, from the update on the report was, contacting West Moberly and Soto and trying to get involvement there, BC Wildfire Services and stuff like that, is so we don't stretch our staff. But Ms. Scott?
I will direct that question to the Director of Protective Services.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. To Council's question, we will not undertake any live fire operation without minimum manning. And that minimum manning is for both the burning event as well as the protection of the town site. So we will have a contingency of a minimum manning crew of, let's say 4. I haven't looked at exactly what we're going to have, but we'll have 4 dedicated firefighters that if we do get a call for a structure fire, the town will still be protected. If we get called for a motor vehicle accident on the highway, those will be the ones that are responding. And so we'll have that buffer built into any of the staffing allocations that we need for the actual burn plan so that day of can run off without a hitch.
Thank you. Follow up?
Nope, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, I don't really have a lot of questions. I just want to commend staff on the report. I apologize, Ms. Scott, for putting staff on the button there to go through it. I understood what it was in my agenda for, but I think when we have that opportunity, I think probably since Friday or Saturday, I've seen some residents on the street and they were already asking about it. So that's why I had an overview, just so people could understand it, because there was questions already about, are we doing anything this summer, or are we pre-planning anything? I'm like, oh, you haven't read the agenda yet. It's in there. So I appreciate staff going through it, giving an overview of it. I also appreciate the time that it took to do it and reaching out to all those partnerships and neighbors. Our Indigenous neighbors is very, very important that we're reaching out to those folks. Great partnerships there. I hope they are able to partake in the day of operations. I just think it's great, and if there's anything else we can do, let us know. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on. Actually, you know what? Let's take a 5-minute recess. Call this meeting back to order. The draft zoning bylaw report dated February 10th, 2025 from the Director of Corporate Services regarding the draft zoning bylaw. Recommendation? Councillor Noxena?
That the draft zoning bylaw be forwarded to a regular council meeting for first reading as presented.
Seconder? Councillor Norbury? Any discussion, comments, questions? Councillor Julick?
I would like to say I read the report word for word. I did not. So I'm glad we're just doing one motion. It's really comprehensive. Is there something that we would be expecting at the next meeting when we do the first reading, or are we just like doing the reading and then like discussing the report? Like what does this look like? Because you guys did this kind of with the OCP, right? So what is the expectation from council in regards to feedback and such?
Yeah, this is if you haven't had an opportunity to go through it. Okay, well, if you went on over it, if there's anything changes that we want to see or we needed to add something maybe with our discussion, when the firm was here, maybe things were missed in some of our meetings that we've had with them. This is a time, it just now, like now here, or when we get to the first reading or the second reading, but not once it goes to a third reading, we have to then go back. So they're still going to a final public, community engagement still in this proposal. Just want to make sure I'm correct. I see that it's there, I read it, but Ms. Scott, it says still one more final engagement.
We have to hold a public hearing. We don't have to, we recommend holding the public hearing. If council does make changes to this bylaw after we have the public hearing, we would have to have another public hearing.
Correct. Okay. Do we know what stage we're going to do the public hearing at? After the first reading, after the second reading?
I believe it says in the report, we intend to have the public hearing after the first reading.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, anything else from council? Okay. Can I call the question? All in favor? Carried. Okay, moving on, taking an adjournment. Councillor Noxena?
That the February 10th, 2025 policies.
Hang on a second, my apologies, before we do that. I know it's not here, but we do have representation in the gallery. I am going to open up to question and answer period. Council, anybody from council have an issue? It is not part of our P&P, which okay, cool. Is there any questions from the gallery? Mr. Donovan, do you have any questions? Okay. Okay, I'll take adjournment, Councillor Noxena.
That the February 10th, 2025 Policies and Priorities Committee meeting be adjourned.
Seconder, Councillor Dussault, all in favor? Carried.